Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this special session this evening, Thursday, October the 6th. And we will begin our special session this evening by asking Deputy Clerk McDowell to please call the roll.
Member Smith?
Yes.
Bolin?
Here.
Sims?
Here.
Scambolery?
Here.
Sandberg?
Here.
Rollo?
Here.
Councilmember Rollo? Sorry, couldn't hear you.
Here.
I see you on the screen.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Are you unmuted?
Can we have the volume turned up in here?
Can you turn up your volume? Or?
He's talking.
I'm
There's no sound.
I'm good. You problems on your end?
He's unmuted, so.
Can anybody read lips?
He says, I'm here.
The clerk
I'm here.
acknowledges that Councilmember Rollo is present.
Thank you. Before I get into the agenda summation, I would like to ask if there is no objection. I propose that in the interest of our limited time today, that we begin with first readings first before moving on to third readings. And so again, if I see no objections, we will go ahead and do that as I summarize the agenda. With parliamentarian and Councilmember Rollo's sound issues, we may have to call on Councilmember Scambolery, our Vice President, to possibly introduce some things if we're unable to hear you. I hope we can get the sound corrected here.
Can you hear me now?
There we go. Thank you. I always feel better when we get the technology straight. All right. So again, we will begin this evening with legislation for first reading, and that will be Appropriation Ordinance 22-04 to specially appropriate from the general fund expenditures not otherwise appropriated to fund an emergency reproductive health care grant program to help address the impacts of Indiana's near total abortion ban. And so then we will move on to legislation for third and subsequent readings and resolutions. And that is a continuation of our discussion on Ordinance 22-24 to amend Title II of the Bloomington Municipal Code entitled Administration and Personnel. And that's regarding amending Article 6 of Chapter 2.04 of the Common Council to establish councilmanic districts for the city of Bloomington. And again, we had our second reading for this on September 21st, and this will be our third reading this evening. That will be followed by any additional counseling scheduling before we adjourn. And we do have a hard stop this evening at 6 o'clock. I will remind everyone there is a Residence Academy meeting in this chambers immediately following. So when we are finished this evening, we all want to clear to make sure that the next group can come in for their meeting. All right, and with that, if we could move to legislation for first readings.
Madam President, I move that Appropriation Ordinance 2204 be introduced and read by the clerk by title and synopsis only.
Second.
Moved and seconded, and will the deputy clerk please read?
Do we need to take a vote first?
I am so sorry. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
Bolin?
Yes.
Sims?
Yes.
Scambolery?
Yes.
Sandberg?
Yes.
Rollo?
Yes.
Rosenbarger?
Yes.
Piedmont Smith?
Yes.
Thank you.
And now, if the deputy...
Councilmember
Councilmember Flaherty
Flaherty.
here. Sorry, I had trouble in the waiting room. I'm also a yes.
Thank you.
Now, if we will have the deputy clerk to read.
Appropriation Ordinance 22-04 to specially appropriate from the general fund expenditures not otherwise appropriated to fund an emergency reproductive health care grant program to help address the impacts of Indiana's near total abortion ban. And the synopsis is, this ordinance appropriates $100,000 from the general fund to provide the necessary resources for an emergency reproductive health care grant program administered in 2022 by the Community and Family Resources Department to address the negative impacts of SB 1 experienced by residents.
Thank you, and this will be referred then to the regular session on October the 19th. And so we are now ready for legislation for third and subsequent readings.
Madam President, I move that Ordinance 2224 be introduced and read by the clerk by title and synopsis only.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Bolin?
Yes.
Sims?
Yes.
Scambolery?
Yes.
Sandberg?
Yes.
Rollo?
Yes.
Flaherty?
Yes.
Rosenbarger?
Yes.
Piedmont Smith?
Yes.
And Smith.
Yes.
Thank you. And will the clerk please read?
Yes. Ordinance 22-24 to amend Title II of the Bloomington Municipal Code entitled Administration and Personnel regarding amending Article 6 of Chapter 2.04, Common Council, to establish councilmanic districts for the city of Bloomington. The synopsis is, this ordinance fulfills the council's obligation in accordance with Indiana Code 36-4-6-3 to establish 6 councilmanic districts in 2022 based upon data received as a result of the federal census in 2020. Under this statute, these districts must be contiguous, reasonably compact, and as nearly as possible of equal population. The ordinance brings forward recommendations of the Citizens Redistricting Advisory Commission, which allowed and invited members of the commission and public to offer maps for the commission's consideration in light of the statutory requirements and other local criteria. The commission met 5 times with members of the public present at each meeting, considered various plans prepared by commissioners, city staff, and the public, and recommended this map, which is in compliance with statutory requirements.
Thank you. And before we begin, there is an amendment that I would like to see if we would like to introduce before we get going. And this is in the chance that this does get adopted, or even if it doesn't, it will help to make things more clean. And this has to do with annexation. So if we could proceed with that.
Madam President?
Yes.
I think first I need to move that ordinance
So sorry.
2224 be adopted.
Second.
Moved and seconded, and now we can continue on with hearing this amendment, which again is a cleanup amendment, and we'll have this explained before we go any further.
Yes, Madam President, I'd like to move Amendment 1 to Ordinance 22-24.
Moved and seconded. Will the clerk please call the roll?
The
Oh,
motion.
there's no need for an amendment?
Oh, we
No.
don't need that. All right, so if we can go ahead and with an explanation of what we're doing here.
Yes, the amendment reads as follows. Ordinance 22-24 shall be amended by inserting a new Section 3 and renumbering subsequent sections accordingly. The new Section 3 shall read as follows. To the extent such annexation is completed, the southeast Bloomington annexation area that was the subject of Ordinance 17-12 is hereby reassigned to Council District Number 5. Following the effective date of the annexation, the city will review and redistrict its council districts as appropriate and required to ensure compliance with Indiana Code 34-4-6-3, Indiana Code 3-5-10, or other applicable laws. And the synopsis, this amendment adds a new section to reassign the southeast Bloomington annexation area. If that annexation is completed, to the new Council District 5 as a result of the redistricting process. Ordinance 1712 had previously assigned the annexation area to District 4, which would no longer be contiguous to the annexation area upon adoption of 2224.
Thank you. Now, is there anything in addition you would like to say, Mr. Lucas, about what this is all about?
I think Councilmember Scamboluri, her reading of the synopsis explained most of this. I'll just add that the assignment of these annexation areas to any current council districts will likely need to change and be updated again once the city knows which of those annexation areas will become effective. It's almost guaranteed that if any of those areas become effective, the population balance would be such that the districts have to be redrawn again anyway. So this assignment is a cleanup action. It addresses one potential issue once any of these annexation areas take effect, but there would be others that would almost certainly necessitate another redistricting.
Thank you. Are there any questions from council regarding this amendment? And seeing nothing from council, no one up on the screen, we go to the public for any comment.
I will just invite members of the public that want to comment on this amendment, Amendment 1 to Ordinance 2224. If you'd like to comment, please use the raise hand feature, which you can find in your control bar under the Reactions tab or the More tab. And if you're not able to locate that, please send a chat to the meeting host.
All right, thank you. And I'm not seeing anyone from chambers approaching the podium.
I see no hands shooting up in Zoom.
All right, let us now go to council for any final comment or to move to a vote on Amendment 1. Seeing no comments, Will the deputy clerk please call the roll on Amendment 1?
Councilmember Sims,
Yes.
Scambolery,
Yes.
Sandberg,
Yes.
Rallo,
Yes.
Flaherty,
Yes.
Rosenbarger,
Yes.
Piedmont Smith,
Yes.
Smith, Volin.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, and Amendment 1 passes 9-0. And so before we move into Ordinance 22-24, I want to remind everyone where we left off on September 21st. The council introduced Ordinance 22-24 for a second reading. We heard the presentation from the chair of the Citizens Redistricting Advisory Commission. We were able to ask questions on the ordinance, invited and heard public comment, and began council debate on the matter. So tonight, I would like to resume the discussion where we left off in the council debate. So if there are further questions or comments from council members on the ordinance, I would invite those. But first, however, I understand that Councilmember Volin has some additional remarks and slides he would like to offer as a follow-up to his presentation from September 21. After Councilmember Volin has presented, I would encourage members to be concise, no more than 3 minutes in our questions and our comments in both the following debate, because we do have a short meeting scheduled tonight that is scheduled to stop at 6. So with that, Councilmember Volin, would you like to begin?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to thank my colleagues for the opportunity to hear this ordinance at third reading. I want to reiterate my admiration for the work the inaugural commission has done. In particular, they've made an effort to unify neighborhoods into single city council districts. Nevertheless, I'm not sure the map they propose is adequate yet, but we've built time into the process to have a back and forth. So again, I thank you all for it. After weeks of research and contemplation, I'll be asking you to join me in voting to send the map back to the commission for reconsideration. There's an awful lot to say about this that there's no time for, which I'm going to send along as written material to the commission. While I encourage you to write your own recommendations, I'll be submitting the following 3 basic principles. Number 1, 3rd Street is not that important as a border for council districts. Number 2, compactness should be de-emphasized in favor of emphasizing communities of interest. And 3, the ultimate community of interest in this town, a college town, is the specific area where constituents live in university-owned apartment buildings. But first, let's take 3rd Street. People don't decide where to live in Bloomington based on what township the home is in. They're concerned about neighborhoods and community, finding a good, affordable home. So for example, 3rd Street is no longer the southern border of campus, it goes through it. There are buildings IU owns south of 3rd and Perry 7, which is pictured, as well as several fraternities and sororities, which are all contiguous with or part of the campus already. People who live in Perry 7 think of their neighborhood as the campus, not as Elm Heights. But Park Ridge East and Gentry Estates have a lot in common as well, being on the east edge of the city. I think they'd be happier being together in the same district than they care about 3rd Street as a dividing line. Secondly, the commission prided itself on drawing as compact a map as it could. Indeed, their map is more compact than the current map, which had a score of only 0.205. The average of 13 maps submitted to the commission, I calculated the compactness score at as 0.258. That was the average score of a submitted map. So it's already more compact than the map we've been working with. Let's note that the precincts we have to work with have not changed from the previous decade. Many of them are uncompact, drawn decades ago for reasons that no longer apply today. The average precinct in Bloomington only has a compactness score of 0.468. Let's take a look here at Perry 10. You can see that it's got that little tail crossing that north-south boundary. It's a discontiguous precinct. It's got a score of only 0.277. That tail looks really out of place, and Perry 12 next to it is a little better at 0.292. These are really low compactness scores for precincts. And why is that little trail in Perry 18 still part of Perry 18? Bloomington 17 has a compactness score of less than 0.2. It too is discontiguous. It almost has to be paired with Bloomington 13. You can see the tail, they're not actually connected to each other, they're just touching in the corners. It almost has to be paired with Bloomington 13 for any map to work. Why does Bloomington 13 even cross the bypass at the bottom? According to the active voter numbers in these precincts, Bloomington 17 and 13 could have been made into 3 precincts, and the part of 13 below the bypass could have been integrated into Bloomington 14. Bloomington 14 and Bloomington 6, speaking of them, they have some of the worst compactness scores in the city. Bloomington 6 has the second worst after Van Buren 02, which we all know why that's such a low score. And of course, Bloomington 14, as I mentioned last time, is very awkward. It's the 5th lowest score in the city. These could easily have been broken by the county into more compact shapes. And finally, there's Bloomington 22. It's a giant precinct with a compactness score of only 0.368. It unites a non-student residential neighborhood between the bypass and Lake Griffey with a lot of IU housing on the very south end, a dorm, Greek letter housing on the east side of Eagleson, and family student housing all on the west side of the bypass. The most distant house in this precinct is more than 2.5 miles away from Tulip Tree Apartments in the southeast corner of this, precinct. You know what joins these two neighborhoods is the giant, vast, empty, unpopulated space of the IU Golf Course. This is by far the largest precinct in the city and joins 2 very unrelated communities of interest. These precincts are unnecessarily uncompact. The county could have redrawn them to be more consistent, but they had no interest. Why did they not follow the same compactness guidance that our commission did? Nevertheless, these are what we have to work with. I'll note that the map I submitted, 18, is only marginally less compact at 0.262 than the commission's map is at 0.293. Both are more compact than the average map submitted, and both are significant improvements over the current map. But let's ask ourselves, what's the point in compactness anyway? It's not to draw maps with satisfying lines. The commission, it's to unify communities of character. The commission focused on 3rd Street and compactness, I think, at the expense of character. The bottom line is it's just not that important to have perfectly square districts if it means that neighborhoods with common interests get divided up. And so I come to my ultimate point, that the ultimate community of interest in a college town is in university-owned housing. Let me show you an area whose constituents, A, are geographically compact and contiguous, B, are unusual in that they all have a single landlord, C, cannot by state decree be non-students, and D, are so numerous that their neighborhood is literally the size and population of an entire city council district. An area like this deserves special consideration when it comes to local redistricting. As the landlord is a public institution owned by state government, the district poses unique challenges to both its constituents and local government. 3 whole precincts are nothing but IU-governed housing. Bloomington 5 has 3 major 1,000-person dorms, Reed, Forest, Wilkie, and several smaller buildings. Bloomington 18 has 4 more 1,000-person dorms, Wright, Teeter, Ashton, and Eigenman. Bloomington 7 includes Foster Quad, another 1,000-person dorm, and most IU Greek housing on the west side of Eagleson and both sides of the extension. Portions of 5 more precincts are contiguous with these 3 main ones. From Bloomington 22, in the bottom corner between Eagleson and the bypass, more Greek houses and family student housing, totaling 926 people. This is data taken from census blocks. Bloomington 3 has 2 of the largest dorms, McNutt and Briscoe Quads, more than 1,000 people each. Bloomington 4 has Collins LLC and Kappa Alpha Theta and the Fiji houses, 600 plus residents. Bloomington 1 has a little finger sticking right that has Sigma Chi in it. And Perry 7 has the 3rd Street houses. Together, this population is more than 11,000 people, all living on state-managed property. But remember, the 2020 census made huge mistakes counting students who went home for the pandemic 2 weeks before Census Day. You may recall the numbers I presented in June. I'll be forwarding them to the commission as well. To see how the dorms should have been counted in 2020, we can look at 2010 census block data. In Bloomington 5, they hadn't yet reopened the Women's Residence Center back as residences. Spruce Hall and the 3rd and Union Apartments hadn't yet opened, so that number went down. But in Bloomington 18, Teeter had not been undercounted, so there are 300 more people there. In Bloomington 7, 1,100 students lived in Foster Quad in 2010, but the census in 2020 counted exactly 8 people in Foster Quad. And in Bloomington 3, the census block with McNutt and Briscoe counted 1,500 students more than 2020 did. Had the dorms been counted at their normal capacity, the population of this neighborhood would be almost exactly the ideal size of a city council district, both now and 10 years ago. Since 2020, those new dorms have opened in Bloomington 5, as has Walnut Grove near McNutt with 700 new residents. The population of this contiguous neighborhood, wholly under the jurisdiction of IU, is more than 15,000 people. But the city has done its part to separate students into their own exclusive areas. Let's again consider the mixed-use student housing zone that we approved in our most recent UDO update. It makes up the west half of Bloomington 23, the east half being nothing but athletics. More than 2,500 students live in that zone immediately west of the athletic complex, mostly in huge apartment complexes, but that precinct is contiguous to all the other housing I presented. In total, we know for sure that there is a contiguous, purely student population of more than 18,000, of almost 18,000 people in the middle of our city. We know for sure from Census and IU data that 15,000 of that population lives in university-controlled housing, and this doesn't include the 25,000 or more students living in private housing. That's, of course, less easy to tally. We have to stop ignoring this. If we're going to stop dividing neighborhoods among council districts, we have to face the fact that this population has been purposely gerrymandered for 5 decades. While I'm agnostic as to how exactly to do it, I know that these precincts come the closest to serving this particular community of interest. These 5 precincts here. This total, again, is what's presented in my map as 13,000, is right at the ideal number of people in a precinct. Students don't vote locally not because they're not interested. It's because everything about the electoral process stymies them. The academic and electoral calendars conflict. Students are forced to move off campus for the summer and to find a new place to live every year, so districts are of little value to them. And non-students at best pay lip service to their right to vote, but otherwise all but discourage their participation in local life. And yet, there are students here, in this case from Bloomington 7, who've been working to get their neighbors registered to vote. We have to make an effort to engage constituencies, a constituency that is half the city. This is the most obvious and expedient way, and now is the best opportunity we're going to have for a decade. The proposed map 11 doesn't go far enough to this end and is still mixing the more eclectic neighborhoods to the southwest of this image with the monolith of campus housing that the purple represents, whose constituents have unusual characteristics and unusual concerns. I'm agnostic about my map 18, but I'm not agnostic about serving the student constituents. I want to urge the commission to rework the map, taking this into account. There's much more to say, but those 3 points, de-emphasize 3rd Street, de-emphasize compactness, and treat the on-campus population, the contiguous university-controlled housing, as a unique and important city council district. It would represent all students, even though it wouldn't necessarily have all students in it. I'm happy to take questions or to engage in debate. I want to thank you for the extra time.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Volan. Are there any questions for Councilmember Volan regarding what he has just presented? No questions?
Yeah, I do.
Councilmember Scambolari.
Yes, thanks. Thank you, Councilmember Volan, for the obvious thought that you have put into this. I want to return to a question I asked last week, and I don't feel like I got a clear answer to it. And that's the notion of who is able to adequately represent students. You've suggested a district that would certainly elect a student to the city council. I would welcome a student on city council. I think that would be fine. But the notion that somewhere implicit in this seems to be the notion that students cannot be represented effectively by anybody other than a student. And I'm a little troubled by that assumption, and I was wondering if you could speak about that.
I can. It's important to note, for example, how difficult it is simply to access student spaces for non-students. I think I can speak for most colleagues in saying that they have never been able to go door to door in a dormitory, and there's a reason for that. We're not allowed to do that. The university has very strict rules. Now, this is also true for apartment buildings, but the vast majority of students in institutional housing are living in large apartment blocks. There are no single-family homes in the purple area that I showed. We also don't have access to the rapidity of the student schedule, the student calendar, because we're not students. They have a very different schedule. They have a very fluid, I mean, the whole campus is a space, and we don't have access to their residences. We're used to being able to go up to constituents at their homes and to speak to them, and this can't be done. Students spend a lot of time in virtual spaces. The pair who are here registered students yesterday because they were able to register dozens of students yesterday because they are part of their social networks, their social groups, which we simply aren't. Just overall, the student life is dramatically different. It's one reason why there is this divide. And yet, as I said before, they're 18, they have the right to vote, they are considered by the census to be local residents. Somehow it's time, I think, that we think about simple ways to make it easier for them to engage, but nothing could beat an actual student, especially considering they, again, are half the city is under the age of, well, I mean, I want, there's about 10,000 grad students, but 30,000 or more students are under the age of 24. And, you know, I like to think I'm cool, but I'm not that cool, you know. I don't think, I mean, yeah, well, no, I mean, I'm not. I try to speak for students, but I've seen what an actual student can do in reaching out to other students. I do my best to reach out to those students, but only students, I mean, if we want to see more students voting, then we have to ask students to vote. It's not enough for us to ask them directly. They don't even really understand local government, and that's what I spend a lot of my time just educating people about local government. I've gone on too long, but I think you get the idea.
May I follow up, or no?
Certainly. Go ahead and follow up, and then Councilmember Rollo has a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I'll jump in. So continuing along that same train of thought, I wholeheartedly agree students are every much of a resident as I am or anybody on this council. The notion that students can't participate or there are obstacles to participation, I'm wondering why those need to be solved by this map. And not, I think, for example, one of the biggest impediments or obstacles to a student being on council is the fact that we have 4-year terms. And that doesn't fit well with the academic pattern that many students follow. So I'm curious as to why this map is necessary to solve it.
Well, like I said, if I could, I would draw a map that was exclusively university housing, but that's not the option that we have. The 2 precincts to the west of the district that I propose do have housing that is not directly, there is private housing in those neighborhoods. And someone who, let's say a sophomore was elected while living in the dorm, they could fill out their term by moving to one of those apartments. So it is possible to do it without having to be wholly dependent on the university, which does offer dorm students the chance to live on campus in the summer. But this goes to another point about students, which is that they move every year. They move intra-locally, but they're still local residents, and we don't have the authority statutorily to declare one at-large seat to be a student seat. The next best thing we can do is take the seat where this area where no non-students can live and dedicate it to basically be the de facto student seat that regardless of where students live, they will treat that representative as an at-large representative. It's the best option that I could find. It's not ideal, but that's why.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Moralo.
Thank you, Councilmember Volan, for your work. But my question is for our council attorney, Lucas. Mr. Lucas, you assisted the commission in their task, and part of their assignment by state statute and ordinance was to respect political boundaries, that is township boundaries. Am I correct?
That was one of the communities of interest identified in the establishing ordinance, Ordinance 20-30, I believe, yes.
Okay, so I'm at a loss for why we should de-emphasize that, since it's actually stated that it should be respected, and they followed the instructions.
Well, like I said, let's take a look at Prospect Hill. Even in the commission map, Prospect Hill is united, even though it crosses 3rd Street. I don't think people moved across Prospect Hill carrying that 3rd Street as the boundary between Bloomington and Perry townships. People don't settle north of 3rd Street in Prospect Hill or south of it because they care about what township they're in. They want to live in that neighborhood, and that neighborhood straddles 3rd Street. So, does Prospect Hill respect the boundary? Because, it's just another example.
But this is a legitimate political boundary.
Say again?
This is a legitimate political boundary, and this is a real political boundary, and they were instructed to respect those boundaries. And so that's why they emphasized it. And so you're making an argument that I think speaks beyond the instructions that they were given. That is to de-emphasize township boundary.
On the contrary, if you look at Bloomington and Perry townships, you'll find that they are not evenly split between the city of Bloomington. It's impossible to draw a map where there's three districts north of 3rd Street and 3 south. They did the best they could. They only had one precinct that went south of 3rd Street. Nevertheless,
I realize that.
It was a big precinct, and it made for an ugly-looking map too, at least in that district. But I feel like I want to quote the foolish consistency line. Like, I don't think the state really cares more about 3rd Street than they do about Prospect Hill either, if you were to put the question to them. I think that, we have had districts that have crossed 3rd Street for years, and I don't have any problem with the fact that the commission made that effort, but I'm saying that when all is said and done, weighing it, neighborhoods are, I'm amazed to hear somebody who's been such a strong advocate for neighborhoods not be an advocate for them now. Neighborhoods are more important than arbitrary lines. You can see it in the arbitrary lines that the precincts were drawn in. Bloomington 22 is ridiculous. It makes no sense unless it was somebody drawing the lines because they were purposely trying to gerrymander the campus in the first place. Remember, right now, on-campus housing is in no fewer than 4 out of the 6 districts. 2, 3, your district and mine all have university-owned housing. Why?
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional questions from council? Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
It's not a question, it's a comment.
Regarding
Regarding the conversation that the question that Councilmember Rollo posed.
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you. Community of interest, in my view, means that people have similar interests and similar priorities. And I would posit that somebody from you know, I live in Perry Township, but I have nothing in common with people who are in Perry Township down by Lake Monroe. I mean, I really think townships are an artificial line that maybe was in the state legislation as an example of a community of interest, but I would rate it pretty low compared with neighborhoods and historic districts and student districts and other things that bind people together with common interests. That's all I had to say.
All right, thank you. Any other questions?
I just want to add one thing, is that Mr. Rollo's concern is valid for the drawing of precincts. Precincts should not cross, the precincts have to respect the township boundary. But the city doesn't, and if you think about it for a minute, you realize that it would be almost impossible to make cities do that without extremely artificial results. So the county had an obligation to keep that's why we have Richland 9, which is 30 people in it, because we annex that area, but it's a tiny portion of Richland Township. But it doesn't mean that we have to keep Richland 9 with any particular, well, actually we do. There's only one precinct that it borders, but you get the idea.
Thank you. I have a question regarding part of your presentation, Councilmember Volin. You talked quite a bit about the compactness of precincts, and you admitted that that is a county function, that is not anything within the purview of this council or certainly the redistricting commission. Also, you make mention of the census data not being maybe quite as accurate as it could be because of being skewed by COVID. But again, these are things that are not really within the control of the redistricting commission, who were, tasked with doing this work. So do you have any more to clarify as to why you brought that into the equation here?
Well, just to show you the slide again, despite the fact that I showed you numbers that include data from a variety of sources, the data here is all 2020 census data. So even though I know that Bloomington 7 is undercounted by almost half, that there's a 47% drop in population from 2010, and we all know that there's the same amount of housing there as there was before, it just was miscounted. And we know it because we have the data from IU, which is a state agency. Despite all that, these numbers are 2020 numbers. And these numbers fall right in between the ideal district size in 2010 and 2020. It's within 200 people. It's closer than that. It's 33 people off of the ideal district size. So again, this is 2020 data you're looking at, and it's fully compliant with the mandate we have.
All right, thank you. And one last question. Your final slide was 3 points that you would send back to the commission if this map were to be rejected. If we could kind of pull that up again. I was hoping that we could get a little bit more clarification even before tonight's meeting as to what exactly you would want the commission to do. Is there anything in addition to those 3 points that you would send back to the team to?
Of the notes that I have that I would send, they all support one of these points. Again, I think we've been talking about how to proceed. I think any member can send back written instructions with a rejected map to say what they should do differently. Those members who don't vote against the map may not have any corrections to offer or instructions to offer. Because I think that the map could be improved. These are the basic, I would encourage everyone to write this, and I believe that Mr. Lucas has informed us that if we were to reject the map, those who would want to send instructions would have till Monday noon to send them along. I would encourage members to sign on to the instructions that I'm giving, but this is what I personally want to send. If anybody else wants to send a concurring opinion with different instructions, the commission will take all that under advisement. I'm not saying they should adopt map 18. I think map 18 is pretty good. I'm saying at least that I know map 15 included Perry 7 or Bloomington 7 along with Bloomington 18 and Bloomington 5, those 3 key precincts, but it was rejected because I think it was, I don't remember the exact reason why, but like anyone is free to submit whatever instructions they see fit.
All right, thank you for that. Any additional questions? Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Well, I have other recommendations to send back to the commission. So when would be the appropriate time to mention those?
Certainly, if you want to talk about them now?
Sure, yeah, since we're short on time. I don't have a presentation, but I see three problems with the proposed map, and I do thank the commission for their hard work. This is, it's impossible to check all the boxes and get everything right, but I would like them to take a look at these 3 points. The proposed map includes Perry 10 with voting precincts to the northeast, so it's in that new District 4, I believe it is. Now, Perry 10 is a very strangely shaped precinct. I regret that the county did not reconsider precinct lines because this is one of the strange ones. But many of the residents of Perry 10 are in the map. They are put together with neighborhoods to the northeast that are wealthier and have little in common with the neighborhoods to the west of Walnut Street Pike, such as Sunny Slopes. Those neighborhoods have more in common with Broadview to the northwest in Perry 5, and with the lower income multifamily portions of Perry 9 to the north. So I want them to take another look at that. The second point is that the proposed map splits the Hoosier Acres neighborhood into 2 districts. This neighborhood includes parcels in Perry 20 and Perry 21. And finally, the proposed map splits the High Point Old Northeast neighborhood into 2 districts. This neighborhood includes parcels in precincts Bloomington 19, 20, and Bloomington 1. So it splits them into 3 districts, actually. So those 3 points, and of course I would provide that in written form, are reasons why I would also like to send back the map for another consideration by the commission.
All right, thank you. Any additional questions before we go to final comments? All right, seeing no additional questions, let us go to final comments on ordinance 22-24.
Is there any public comment? Since we're in 3rd reading, is there any public comment?
No, we've already done that.
What? Point of order. We always have public comment before we come back to council for comment. I'm a little confused.
This is a new reading.
If it's the will of the council, we will go to public comment. If you want to make the
I'll go ahead and
announcement
offer-
for anybody
Yes,
at home.
if there are members of the public attending on Zoom that would like to offer comment, please use the raise hand feature to indicate you'd like to speak. You can find that raise hand button in your control bar under the Reactions tab or the More tab, or you can send a chat to the meeting host to let us know you'd like to comment that way.
Thank you, and we do have someone here in Chambers, maybe a couple of people in Chambers. We will start with Chambers. If you'll state your name.
Hi, Alex Semchuk. I'm the chair of the Citizens Redistricting Advisory Commission. Again, I have to take issue with Councilman Volan's identification of IU students as the ultimate community of interest. In a city of Bloomington, there is no ultimate community of interest. Everyone in Bloomington is part of the ultimate community of interest. And I personally believe it's unnecessary to attempt to pack as many IU students as possible into one district. It's almost impossible to do that anyway. I think kind of piggybacking off of something another council member said in response to the presentation, saying that the precincts that were drawn by the county lack compactness shouldn't mean that the districts that we independently are drawing in this commission should also lack compactness, saying, well, this group did this poorly, therefore it shouldn't be considered as important by this group. There should be no relationship between the two. We are not tasked with fixing problems caused by the county government. And something else that Councilman Volan said, talking about students in the district having unusual characteristics and unusual concerns, I think the entire city of Bloomington has unusual characteristics and unusual concerns as someone who's only lived here for 7 years. So unique considerations, yes, but ultimately if it's in the interest of students to be a part of local government, it's up to them to exercise that interest. No one can make them do that. And college students definitely are a unique population, but remembering what it's like to be a college student myself, local government interest was way down on the list of things that were my priorities at the time. So ultimately, even if you do try to pack all the students into one district, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get more involvement from them. And I do appreciate the recommendations that Councilman Volin and Councilwoman Piedmont-Smith offered, but I did not see any work done on attempting to create a new map, which is unfortunate, because that's ultimately what we have to do. I know last meeting we did identify some of the problems with the maps that Councilman Volin put in. It's one thing to say, I hope the council or the commission can take a look at these regarding the precincts and whatnot, but to just throw out suggestions and not say, well, if we change the population of this district, it's also going to change the population of all the other districts, and we have to adhere as closely as possible to that magic number of 13,000 plus. Show us a map. I think that's something that, as chair of the commission, that's something that I would appreciate. So as of right now, that concludes my comments.
Thank you. I will remind everyone this is a time-limited meeting, so we didn't put a time limit on public comment. If I could ask, I know Alex Sumchuk was the chair of the commission, if we could keep the comments to, 2 minutes each? Is that fair? Any objection? All right, let's go ahead.
Hi, my name is Isabel DeCastro, and I'm a junior at Indiana University currently. I know there are a lot of assumptions about college students' engagement in local government, and as a part of the Alpha Chi Omega sorority, I'm a part of the everyday, the Greek life community, the population that Councilman Steve Volin was talking about. But I am one of also 47,000 students here on campus, each with different assumptions made about them, but each student has something valuable they can offer to our community. And I believe that when given the right opportunity and when taken seriously by older and non-students, current students can use their voice to make a difference. And as a student in the political and civic engagement program here at IU, I have actually enjoyed applying my education that I'm currently receiving into the local politics and voting outreach efforts in our community. Just yesterday, I worked with MC Now President Natalia Galvin to organize a tabling event on North Eagleson Avenue from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., and we registered over 50 students in one day alone. So I can't imagine the impact students can make on our community if they were taken as seriously as both City Council Member Steve Volin and Ms. Galvin have taken me. City Council members, I encourage you to give students this more concrete opportunity to get involved locally through the proposed redistricted map. An effort like this one would show students that they are adults who have voices that matter in this community. This change attitude would increase the student participation that is lacking today, because I firmly believe that when students see other students getting involved, I guarantee more will fall in line with this mission. And as a body of over 47,000 voices, I believe students will surprise you with our passion and activism, so please just give us a chance to do so. Thank you.
And next speaker, and again, you will have 2 minutes once you state your name.
Perfect. My name is Will Staley, and I'm a longtime resident of Bloomington, Indiana, and I, mostly work with our, resident population here. And just a couple of quick facts, which one was presented on social media by Representative Volin, who said half of IU population is of IU students, and that's false. There are 80,000 IU residents. There isn't, and there's 40,000 IU students, 48,000 IU students, so it's not half. So that's point one. Point two, over the next several years, the population of 18-year-olds is expected to decline. So from 2021 to 2022, it declined overall by 1.1%. And over that, the next several years, the population of 18-year-olds are going to continue declining. And then for IU, IU does have 48,000 students. However, where IU is moving currently are more and more classes online. Currently, only about 65% of IU students do graduate after 4 years. So out of those 40,000, not everyone is actually here at all times, and more people are taking classes more and more. So more of that population is actually going to be, in New Jersey, California, New York, and I know this because then vast majority of our residents do come from East Coast and do come from the West Coast, and very little actually live in Indiana, and I would say probably about maybe 2% of it live all over Indiana.
We appreciate your comment. Anyone from Zoom this evening?
Moment on Zoom, and I apologize if I mispronounce your name, C. Trzynka.
Thank you. You have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, my name is Charles Trzynka. I'm a faculty member at IU, and my anecdotal evidence is that students don't vote. The quickest way well, maybe not the quickest way, but one of the better ways to lower my teaching ratings is to try to talk them into voting in the local elections. They tend to vote at their own homes. They tend to vote or not at all. And I think the terms are, the students are here for 4 years, maybe a little longer, but they simply don't. So packing them is not won't increase their tendency to vote. Perhaps giving them more opportunities to participate in local activities, but my information is anecdotal, and I wonder if Councilman Boland has any data that would contradict my view. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? All right, seeing no more public comment, we come back to council for any final comment. Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
For Mr. Semchuk's information and that of the commission, map 18 actually would address the problems that I raised as well as the issue that Councilmember Volan raised. So I do encourage my colleagues to send this back and vote no on the current legislation and send this back to the Redistricting Commission with the recommendations that were discussed this evening. And it doesn't mean that they have to adopt map 18, but I would like them to discuss these issues. And map 18 shows that it is possible to incorporate these concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Flaherty.
Thank you. First, I just want to thank the commission as well and say that I think they've done really good work. I think it's advanced the conversation considerably, and I envy the quality of what they've done. But I agree with some of the nuanced points of Councilmembers Volan and Piedmont Smith. In particular, I think we can preserve the compactness to a very significant extent that the commission sought after and achieved, while also having the additive benefit of keeping more neighborhoods together. And I'll mention 3 in particular. I think Councilmember Volan makes a compelling point with respect to university-owned housing in particular, common landlord, common set of constraints. It's a neighborhood. So that's Bloomington 7, Bloomington 5, and Bloomington 18 that I would like to be seen in a single district. Right now, the map keeps, I think, Bloomington 7 out of, separate from the other 2. And the 2 others that Councilmember Piedmont Smith mentioned that I share an interest in preserving in a single district would be Perry 20 and 21, which is Hoosier Acres, and Perry 19, 20, and 1, which is the Old Northeast neighborhood. And if I have additional comments besides that and feedback to help guide the commission in reconsideration, should it go back to them, I will send those via writing. And as Councilmember Piedmont Smith already noted, I believe map 18 does achieve all of those things while preserving compactness to a significant degree. And that's not to say that that's the only map that could, but it is one that does demonstrate that possibility. So thank you again to the commission. Thank you to my colleagues and everybody who put work and thought into this.
Thank you. Councilmember Rosenbarger.
Thank you so much. Thank you for everyone for being here today. I just have some comments based on the discussion so far. So this has already been mentioned. I'm trying to be quick. Compactness can only be compact as the precincts we are given. I know that is just right. We have to deal with the cards we are dealt, but I also think this needs to be taken into consideration when we are looking at, again, communities of interest. So then communities of interest and the very important question about students. I think what Councilmember Volan said about creating a contiguous, we have 17,818 basically student-only precincts that are contiguous, and looking at keeping those together is important. I think just as important as keeping a neighborhood together. I think council and elected offices should look like the makeup of our population. I think this is true in terms of all protected classes, so race, gender, sexual orientation, and age is one of those. And if you look at council makeups of other college towns, almost all of them have at least one student member of council on them. I think when we look at IU as having 47,000 students, we can think about a council that doesn't have any women on it in a similar fashion, and what we would want to do to encourage women to run for office in Bloomington. And I think that a council without students is a significant issue here, and we need to consider what we need to do to get students to run for office. And I think this is a step in that direction. I think what Isabel said, speak in her public comment, that this gives students a better chance to get involved and to make an impact here is quite important. And I think being role models and bringing people up as we are the people kind of in power makes a lot of sense. I also think what Councilmember Isabel Piedmont Smith said about socioeconomic status. I know it's hard to consider in the maps that we have and the data that we have, but for example, keeping Perry 10 with the district it is in now, more similar to Broadview and Perry 9, I think that makes a lot of sense to make sure we are strengthening the voices of the people who are historically left out. One question I was asked, who is adequately able to represent students? Like, are we able to do that? I think what we hear in general from the feedback of the population is that no, students do not feel adequately heard or represented by the people on council right now. I also would just look at the history of laws in the U.S. that men created, and those are basically not so in favor of, for example, women. And women tend to, bring about laws for equal pay and paid maternity leave and greater access to health care, like women's issues. So I think having that voice on council of a student would be a very big deal. 4-year terms was also questioned. We have many council members who resign mid-term for a number of reasons. They move, they change jobs, they have family changes. One just small anecdote there. I don't think I've lived in the same house for 4 years since I moved away from my parents' house at college. And I will also be moving during my own council term. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councilmember Volan.
Mr. Staley's statement of facts were confusing to me. Half of 80,000 is 40,000. IU students are at least half the population, have been for many years. Mr. Staley's statements defy the IU fact book, which is available online, and they do a census every semester of students who are currently enrolled and physically present. The number of students listed as being so and not taking online classes has been around 43,000 for several years. IU has never had a majority of out-of-state students. The highest number that I found on the fact book was 42%, not 60. They're not all from the East Coast and the West Coast. A majority are from Indiana. And as to Mr. Semchuk's concerns, when I use the word ultimate, I don't mean more important than anyone else. I mean simply largest. The student population is the ultimate population, and that it's the largest age group, the largest number of that demographic in the city. And the largest, that lives in that type of housing or has that type of housing need. And I keep saying that I'm somehow trying to cram 43,000 students into one district. That's not. I'm saying that that district can act as a de facto at-large district, but it doesn't mean there's still going to be students in other districts, in all the other districts. I'm not saying that any of us cannot represent students. I'm saying that a full-time student would be in a far better position to do so and to understand the needs of this vast population than a non-student would. I include myself in that number. I'd urge the commission to study map 18. I was trying not to draw the ultimate map for them, there's that word again, since we've asked them to do this work, and to remind Mr. Semchuk that I sent along several maps, 3 of which passed the population variance test, 17A, 17B, and 18. If he wants me to suggest a different map, I'd submit map 18, but there may be a better map that meets the various criteria that council has described. But like I said, the commission has already done important work just by independently reconsidering the map at all. The council has an obligation to weigh in and to approve the ultimate map, there's that word again. But most importantly, there's no rush. We've built in time to have this conversation. We do redistricting once a decade. This is the first real conversation we've had about how our city council map should be drawn, in my experience and in the experience of anyone I know who's been involved in politics for more than 20 years. Let's take the time to make it the best map we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Sims.
Thank you. The first thing I do want to say is a couple weeks ago, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was introduced as part of the discussion in order to support this piece of legislation, and thus rejected the map and sending it back to the commission. As many of you know, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 is a landmark piece of federal legislation prohibiting racial discrimination in voting. So again, I'll just repeat, I am really, really glad that that wasn't presented as a supporting piece of this argument. Also, I heard the term purposefully gerrymandered, and I'm not so sure what that means. I'm not so sure if it can be documented. I just don't know what that means. Was it done after one of the census counts in 1990, 2000? I don't which group purposefully gerrymandered student districts. So I'd like to get to that. Also, I just don't buy the fact that students are not represented. And there is a difference between, I heard the argument, active voters versus the population shifts. The census, as well as this redistricting, is based on the population shift with some other criteria. I don't think that number of active voters in any particular district or precinct was part of that criteria. I also would submit that in a couple, at least 2, I do believe, of the council districts, there is enough student precincts that if, in fact, the majority of them were registered and voted accordingly at a higher level than the very low voting rate, that they, in essence, could control whoever they sent from that district. And I'm not so sure that swinging the map around would change that. I think registering, voting, to go alongside with community participation, I think would be a better approach. I am enamored with student passion and activism as well. I think many of you know I work hand in hand with some student groups, albeit underrepresented groups, black groups, black fraternity, Panhellenic, that sort of thing, with other groups, but I work with those. Student passion and activism is a part of this community. And to suggest that this map would do anything to activate or even thwart that, I think is off base. Lastly, I want to thank Mr. Semchuk and this commission for doing the arduous work that they were asked to do. We've talked about contiguous districts, reasonably compact, and as nearly as possible equal population. One thing I want to emphasize, and I think may have been overlooked, there was ample opportunities for members not only of the commission, but in the community and even members from this council to submit separate maps during that process, or to attend and add some input during that process that could have helped us apparently get to where some of us want us to get tonight. And I'm not so sure that this bringing this to the council now to undo what the commission has done when there was an opportunity to at least have some effect or input in previous meetings is the proper way to go as well. So having said that, I will support ordinance 2224. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? And seeing no final comments, yes, Councilmember Scambolari?
Yeah, just quickly, just some foundational comments. I've watched every meeting of the Redistricting Commission. I intentionally did not participate. I don't see that as my role. I see my role is to let the commission do its work. I've discussed redistricting in most of my constituent meetings this year, and almost exclusively, actually, in the last one. And that included sharing some of the maps and sharing some of the discussion we've had here around the possibility of a student district. So I take this very seriously. I wholeheartedly believe students are people, and they are here, and they are our residents, and they are our neighbors. I would love to see an increased voter participation among students. I do believe they were undercounted in the last census. But there are some key questions I ask myself as I think about this. First of all, was the process, the redistricting, the mapping process followed by the commission that we established, was it conducted with integrity? I think it was. Okay. Have students, the next question I ask, have students been disadvantaged in a way that needs to be remedied, that merits our putting a thumb on the scale and actually creating a student district? Again, as I shared before, I think one of the biggest impediments to actually a student seeking membership on city council is the fact that we have 4-year terms, and that doesn't lend itself well to the calendar that many of our students follow. Beyond that, I cannot help but note that we also had students on this commission, and we're very intentional about that when we wrote Ordinance 2030. So that's part of it. And then a very pivotal question for me is what would justify given that we established this, we voted unanimously to establish an independent commission to do this work, what would justify substituting my judgment for theirs at this point? What kind of lack of integrity in the process, or what kind of unfairness to a particular population would merit that? And I haven't seen anything that rises to the level that would cause me to substitute my judgment for the work that we've asked them to do and that they've done. So with that in mind, I'll be supporting this map. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further council comment? And seeing none, I will ask the Deputy Clerk to please call the roll on Ordinance 22-24 as amended.
Councilmember Scambolari.
Yes.
Sandberg.
Yes.
Rallo. Councilmember Rallo.
Yes.
Flaherty.
With apologies to the neighborhoods needlessly being divided, no.
Rosenbarger.
No.
Piedmont Smith.
No.
Smith.
Yes.
Bolin.
No.
Sims.
Yes.
And Scambolari.
Yes.
Yes, and that passes 5-4. All right. Last on the agenda, any discussion of our council schedule?
No, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Let us call to adjourn. All in favor? Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you.